Hi. So I'm CJ Hill. I just recently finished an MFA program at University of Massachusetts. So I'm mostly going to show you work that I made in that program in the last 3 years, or mostly in the last 2 years, actually. So we can go to the first slide. These are graphite like sketchbook drawings. Um, and something I want to talk about too is a big thing I wanted to develop in my practice at grad school was kind of joining my writing practice and my visual art practice, because they were things that I was always kind of like working on both, going back and forth between the two, but it felt like they were kind of like suffocating one another because they were such different processes. So something I got really into was sort of uh, finding ways to bring those together in projects and installations, and sort of getting excited about the way that the writing and the visual art could like complicate one another and sort of just like confuse what you're seeing or confuse what you're reading, and not necessarily explain one another or illustrate one another, but just sort of create something a little bit like greater than the parts. So this series was actually a sort of drawing that I've been doing for years, just sort of these uh, like sketches of things in the morning, really. Um, and I wanted to bring these together and sort of like create a cohesive group of them and a single piece. So I sort of installed them, maybe like 20 of them or something, on a wall. You can go to the next slide, I think. And then had a writing that's sort of like the writing was trying to kind of shift the scale of these works, and like some of it was focused on the what was in still life, these kind of like microcosm still life drawings, and then the scale of the writing would kind of shift back and look at like the life of the artist who's making them, or the life of the person who's seeing these and spending time with them, and then shift back again and sort of look at a more broader like kind of global reality, and sort of just like getting excited about trying to hold all three of those things at once in your head as you're looking at these artworks. So this is another piece titled Weird Thirst. And as you can see, there's some of the pages have text written on them. So this is another kind of experiment where I wanted to try combining drawing and writing. So this series of drawings was really me like kind of like chasing this singular image, or like a specific type of mark making, this kind of like rhythmic mark making, and and kind of looking into how I could make images that kind of ebb and flow in and out of recognizable form, or that kind of like toe that line right on the edge of being something that you can start to see something in or recognize something in. And the writing in this too is kind of concerned with the same thing. So it sort of talks about this. It's another like first person narrative kind of writing that talks about this experience of something called pareidolia, which is just basically the term for the human mind's tendency to like find images in chaos, basically. So seeing like Jesus in a mold stain or something like that would be an example. So it's sort of the writing never references directly to the drawings, and the drawings don't speak directly to the writing, but they just sort of yeah, are kind of like tiptoeing together around this idea. Um, yeah, we can go to the next slide. That's a little sketch of a drawing that it sort of talks about this story of a scientist who convinced himself in the early days of telescopes that he was seeing canals on Mars. And so this is a drawing that he made of the canals that he was seeing on Mars. And this was kind of like a somewhat accepted theory for a little while, until it was just disproven and shown to be a case of pareidolia, of sort of just like seeing what you want to see, or seeing what uh, maybe what you're like afraid to see or something. Okay. Yeah, this is a series that is most similar to what I've been working on here at Jentel. Um, it's a little bit smaller than this, is like a little bit bigger than life size, but they're painted with a water-soluble graphite, so it sort of functions a little bit like watercolor, but it's a graphite, and you can get this very beautiful sort of like mineral textural quality in the painting. Um, and these were, I think of them as sort of abstracted landscapes. We can maybe go to the next slide. I think there's another one. And yeah, these were all sort of like meditations on place. thinking about the experience of kind of the act of seeing and the experience of being a body in place, which is such a more like complex experience than like maybe just a photograph can communicate for me or something. So it's sort of this again, like doing writing in parallel with creating these paintings allows the drawing or the painting to sort of be this very like intuitive pursuit, sort of just like following kind of like a more raw process of making or something. And then the writing happening parallel and sort of separate, that's where a lot of the more like concept walking through happens. So I'm going to read a little bit of the writing that went with this series. Actually, could you go to the next slide? And the subject matter of the writing is sort of about like our own alienation and our own confusion of like our relationship to place and environment. So, okay, so I go walking down a dirt road. To my left and right are enormous stretches of nearly featureless land divided into narrow strips. Each is distinguished by just a few meager details. One plot is flat dirt with small weeds holding onto their green. Another has tire tracks cutting through it in looping parallel marks. One is pale with a littering of white chaff, and another looks like it was run through with a large comb, straight dark lines extending off to the far trees. I turn down a raised path that follows the ridge of a flood dike, my shadow sunken in the ditch to my side. I look out at the partitioned land and think of how we divide the vast earth into scalable units, acres, territories, states. We make it measurable and make it ours, and then we sell it. A thing is easiest to sell when it is unblemished, without specificity, and especially when it doesn't already belong to somebody else. So we make a pastime of erasure. We erase forests, cities, histories, entire peoples. Muting a place is how we make it ours. There is a way that we go about forgetting the things that happen in a place, and there's another way that we make a place forget itself. So that's just like one of the excerpts that's written on the wall, and there's actually like a second group in this installation, and probably like 6 or 7 little written excerpts on the wall amongst these sculptures. So these ones are related to that series. They actually came before. These colors are a little not exactly authentic to the paintings, but yeah, these were maybe kind of how that started. I was like doing these paintings. I would basically just like, it was in the fall, and I would just spend all like afternoon like walking in the woods in the Northeast, beautiful colors, and then I would go and spend the night like painting and just really focusing on like color relationships. And using this very simple kind of language of landscape, object, and then like figure, just to sort of create these kind of somewhat flattened or simplified spatial images, and sort of just using those images or those shapes as excuses to kind of like play with color relationship. So yeah, the last 2 slides are really just to show that I also make some like bigger work. So these ones are like wall-sized drawings, charcoal drawings. They also have a written piece that goes with them. The writing sort of deals with this idea of the acrobat as kind of like an open metaphor that, yeah, can kind of just like contain the whole spectrum of like human joy and violence and play and pain, and everything just sort of fits into that for me. These are some other, also done with that water-soluble graphite painting. They're a little bit more, again, going back to that place between abstraction and representation. These kind of bring in a lot more like symbol, and yeah, kind of developing like an alphabet of symbols and images that were like, these are probably like, I think like 60 inches tall, but there's a lot of smaller ones that are sort of, yeah, developing this like language of symbols. And they were kind of made in relation, or like, yeah, concerning when I was really concerned with like what was happening in the world more broadly, and felt like I couldn't really like not look at this, and kind of like dealing with a sense of powerlessness in the face of like broader political moment. So yeah, trying not to be like super on the nose with that, or like make necessary political work, but also make something where I could like deal with those thoughts. And again, there's writing which sort of like is addressing that more directly. So as you're, going through this work, seeing the work, you're also reading these things that sort of like are naming these things happening in the world that then you're sort of like made to hold that information while you're like looking at these images that are a little bit more ambiguous, but hopefully like carry some of that emotional concept. Okay, does anyone have any questions?